The one handout that people might have seen before, it's the one I used last year when I lectured on the beginning of Lent and talking about structured approaches. And how many were not here last year for that lecture? Good, I'm glad we handed this out. Well, I mean, it gives one whole approach to Lent, I suppose the traditional one that we usually think of. That is, that we're going to do some special actions during the Lenten time, take on some new practices. And so in here, that listing, we see after some theological perspectives on Lent, is advice that maybe we read some good books, get into prayer and meditation, so on. And then I go through a number of meditation techniques that people can, I think, find, can just to read through different ways. You always hear that word, you're supposed to meditate. Well, there's a lot of ways of doing it. And we see a Benedictine method here, Ignatian, and so on, different ways of going about all of that. And then there's a rather lengthy section on the question of fasting. Has to do with that traditional practice and trying to see it maybe in a new contemporary way, trying to see the spiritual dimension of all of that. Then we talk about the importance of writing things down, keeping a journal. That's often a way to increase our awareness of God's activity in our lives. And then some spiritual reading that we had there, and other Lenten practices that are noted. So that is one whole approach to Lent. It's like do new things, like go to Mass during the week, or read from the Bible every other day, or do some meditation periodically, do some fasting, give up dessert, quit smoking, all of those kind of things that have been traditional. And what I am calling tonight, and usually a structured approach to the spiritual life. And certainly that is important and needs to balance what I am going to say tonight. In fact, I notice I draw some criticism now and then for this situational approach and not balancing it with something else, this more structured approach to things. So to keep all of that in the background for what we're going to say tonight, and people might want to read those notes over it later on. But the burden this evening is to talk about what I'm calling a situational approach to the Lenten season, making the most out of it. And it's a general thing that I've talked a lot about lately, situational approaches to the spiritual life. And the general principle of it is very simple. That is that life should write the agenda for our spiritual life. That very often it isn't a matter of adding on some new practices, but doing what we're already doing better. Of finding deeper meaning in the things we're already about. So in one sense, it is sort of foundational to the whole thing, because, if we don't get that right, for example, if we're not being charitable, we give up smoking, and then we're hard to get along with, well, then we've missed something about life or what Christianity is calling us to. So there's something foundational about this situational approach. We've got to make life right. We've got to do what we're already doing in a better fashion, see a deeper meaning in it, find better motivation for it all, etc. So that's the simple, very simple idea of what I have to say tonight. And I think the whole thing is sort of an invitation to see ways in which we could live those things in a better fashion. So I'm talking about simple things like eating and sleeping and watching the news and getting up and moving around. Just ordinary things that make up our life, our work, our regular activities. So what I want to do is look at various elements in that and say, well, how could we do it better, and what theological principles would guide us in going about that. As I say, it's more of an invitation to reflect more deeply about those particular kind of activities. So let me start first of all with this idea of praying. And on the purple sheet, I won't be following the purple sheet, but it is a guide. The reason I give that to you is for people who read books and want to know where the ideas came from. As I always say, if I have an original idea, I'll tell you. It's all on here, so I'm giving my source. Every time I say something, I'm not going to say where I got it, but it's from books like these, and famous theologians like Karl Rahner, and so on. And what I've tried to do is find books that I hadn't read before, like when I lectured last year, and a lot of books published this year or the last couple of years that I hadn't seen before, and tried to allude to those as a way of maybe having some fresh ideas, and maybe books that people haven't seen before. But I'm not going to, and the order of my talk will probably go something like under Roman numeral 2 on the purple sheet, although that'll depend on how the time goes, I think. But where it says like A, transform, they're all transformations. How do we transform our ordinary experiences? And breathing into prayer, toil into work, etc. So that's what I'm going to be following along with. So let me say a bit about that transformation. I mean, the whole call of the Christian life is to put on the mind of Christ, isn't it? Paul tells us that we are to become new creatures because we're Christians, have a new way of looking at life, a deeper way of acting, be more responsive to the call of the Spirit, and hear the word of the Lord and live it out in a more effective way. We're to be new creatures. And so part of the job of life is to transform. That's the key word for the whole evening, is transformation. How do we transform these activities we're already doing, like working and sleeping and eating, and find some deeper meaning and transform them so that they bring us closer to the Lord and make us more responsive vehicles of the Spirit. So all the way through that's the point. So the first thing is, I'm labeling it, transforming breathing into prayer. And for each one of these, I suppose I have an example in mind. They're often composites and so on, so no names needed here or anything. But the first example is this. There's a young woman who decides that during Lent she really wants to pray better. She's going to pray more and do it better during Lent. But she's got one big problem. That is, she's very angry at God. Now in prayer, you're supposed to be talking to God. So she's sitting there saying, well, how am I going to pray during Lent when I'm in a rage against God? In fact, sometimes just to walk into church upsets me. I get mad just when I walk in. And when I go like this and start the prayer, something's going on inside of me. I can feel those negative emotions flowing because I'm mad at God. Because he has dealt me an unfair hand. Well, life has not been good to me. So what now am I going to do about all of this? So this young woman, being very creative, solved her problem in this way. She decided to make her anger at God the subject of her prayer throughout Lent. So she would use Lent to talk to God about how angry she was at him. And she would do it on the model of what we do in human relationships when we're angry at somebody or upset with somebody, where we go to them and say, I'm upset and not happy about this, and this bothers me, and what you did the other day really has hurt me, and we say it. And in saying it, sometimes we find a certain release, and sometimes it clears the air. Not always. Sometimes it transforms the situation, moves it to a new level. So what this young woman did is creatively apply that common phenomenon in human experience to a relationship with God, prayed throughout the Lenten season, talked to God about her anger, and found that as a result, her anger was somewhat decreased. She wasn't quite so upset by the end of Lent, and she really felt she had enriched her prayer life and probably found something very important about what prayer is all about. So that says all I want to say about this topic in a sense. I mean, that's the whole of it in the story. The point is that we seem to be able to improve our prayer life by simply talking to God about our ordinary experiences, about our events of our lives, about what's going on in our psyche, about about our emotional life, about our imaginative life. That becomes the grist for prayer, the very substance of the prayer, as we talk to God about. So we don't need to go off in a corner so much and spend a half hour with some special prayer book and reading some prayers that someone else wrote or saying the Hail Mary over and over or something. What we can do is simply take what's happening and sort of position ourselves before God in relationship to that. We can talk to God about it. So the daily activity, the general principle I draw from that is that our daily activity should be the grist, the substance for our prayer life. Now, that is based on what I think is a sound theology borrowed from Karl Rahner, who says that really we are creatures who are oriented to God, directed positively to God in all aspects of our being, every part of ourselves. It's not just like our soul is directed to God, but we as bodily creatures are oriented to the mystery, as with our emotions and our imaginative life, our brains, our moral capacities, our religious capacities, all of that is directed to God. All of that is encompassed by God's love. All of that is to be drawn into communion with the one we call our God. Another way of saying the same thing is that religious experience isn't one kind of experience alongside of pleasure or sexual experience or playing ball or golf or something. And that's the way people often think of religious experience. It's one kind of experience you have like a lot of other kinds. But in this theology, religious experience isn't an aspect of life, but it's a dimension that suffuses everything. So we wouldn't talk about religious experience so much, but a religious dimension to all of our experience. So there's even a religious dimension to getting angry, or to feeling jealousy, or to finding pleasure in life. Religious dimension to all of that, that's what sets up the possibility of praying to God about all of those things. They're already encompassed by God's grace. We're admitting, in a sense, who we really are. Another way of saying the same thing is that all of our activities are potentially revelatory. Everything about our lives, everything that goes on, has the potential, root power to speak to us of God. So that would be the theology that would stand behind this idea of making the daily life activities the substance of our prayer. And then for each one of these, I want to offer some practical advice. It's interesting that the Eastern Fathers were so interested in making God a part of their life that some of them said, well, if we could just make him part of our breathing, then we'd have it made. And so they thought, well, how would we do that? Well, they decided they would do it by repeating the name Jesus or a little prayer every time they left their breath out. So they'd walk around saying in their own mind, Jesus all the time, or Jesus Christ, Savior, have mercy on me, or some phrase like that. So they tried to incorporate this religious outlook right into their whole mindset, their whole approach, their very breathing. Because we know in various religious traditions, there's a great emphasis on breathing as the basis for our meditation. As Richard Woods, who spoke here last Sunday evenings, pointed out, that bodiliness is at the very center of the spiritual life. It's the fundament, the basis of it all. It all flows out of bodiliness. It flows out of our breathing. And so various religious traditions have had meditation techniques that are in accord with one's breathing. You're supposed to be aware of the breath coming in and say little prayers and let your breath out. We call that mantra meditation. And that becomes one way of transforming breathing into prayer. I mean, actually. So you can actually, as you're walking along, do that. Or I can do that standing here. And at the break time, I can grab about 10 good deep breaths and each time say my little prayer and find some comfort in that, some relaxation, some sense of the presence of the Lord. So that's one practical bit of advice. Link the prayer with one's very breathing. It's great for relaxation, for focusing. We call that the centering prayer or the Jesus prayer in the Christian tradition. Then, the other thing that we could do is, instead of getting all bent out of shape because we got distractions in our prayers, we could use those. So if you go to Mass and you start thinking about the political situation in Eastern Europe because you just read about it in the paper, well, big deal. I mean, instead of saying, gee, I got a crack here, what we could do is just say a prayer for the people in Eastern Europe. We think about a friend we met at a party and someone who really was interesting and attractive and zestful and all that and a lot of chemistry flowing, and we think, well, instead of thinking, wow, this is a bad thought during my prayer time, we could make that the subject of the prayer. To talk to God about that emotion going on inside of myself. So, deal with distractions in a calmer kind of way. Just incorporate them. Instead of thinking, this is terrible and I'm a weak person because my mind flows all over the place. We could take our negative thoughts about ourselves, or the positive ones. I should locate that in a better way and say, our whole journey in self-knowledge can become part of our prayer. I think St. Teresa of Avila insisted on that self-knowledge was a great path to prayer. And so, as we learn more about ourselves, our strengths and weaknesses, we learn about things that upset us and we don't deal well with, all of that can be incorporated into this general orientation to God. Can make that part talking to God about it, thanking Him for the things we've learned. We can look for a healing of memories in that as we begin to say, geez, I didn't handle that well, and that's bad about my life, and that didn't work out. Instead of just getting bent out of shape over it, one can put that before God, look for a certain healing. Very often we need a little bit of silence in order for that to happen, I think. And then fourthly, what we need is to do is to cultivate sort of an abiding sense of God's presence. And I tried to look at what does that mean? I mean, you always say that when the Scripture tells us pray always, abiding sense of God's presence. And how would that feel? Or what does it look like? What would we be trying to do there? Some suggestions. It would be sort of a submissive listening. These are all habitual. I mean, try to walk around with sort of a listening posture in relationship to God. Or a hunger and thirst for the things of God. And want to know more, find out. A stripping away of our false ambitions and our pride so as to be more receptive to the divine message. Walking around with a quiet joy. Life's all right, the whole thing's flowing here. God's in charge. The whole world's in God's hands. So I can have this sort of calm, joyful spirit about me. A steady confidence. There's a little more secret. A steady confidence that life is trustworthy. Perhaps, as I said before, just a resting in God's presence, a non-frenzied thing, just resting in the power of the Lord. An abiding sense of gratitude for the gift dimension of life. Not Tuesday things out, well, thank you, Lord, but all along the line, in the difficult days, an abiding sense of gratitude, thank you that there's a gift dimension of life, that the whole life is filled with blessings that we do not have come of us. Accepting God's judgment on all of our activities. Accepting God's judgment. To be okay to stand under the judgment of the gospel. So it cuts into my self-righteousness and my pride. Lets me know that there is progress that needs to be made. And out of all that, maybe we would look for some results. Maybe some good things ought to happen, like greater self-knowledge that we would achieve. A deeper appreciation of the beauties of nature. A greater sensitivity to other people. We'd look for results from all of this. And finally, it seems as though the structured side, when we would find 15 minutes for formal prayer, or a half hour sometime to read our Bibles and get in tune with things, has the purpose of attuning us to this breathing transformed into prayer. In other words, we do that not just to have a half hour where we can get away from the madding crowd for a while, but in order to program ourselves, attune ourselves to all of the possibilities for prayer that would exist in our daily lives. So, that's point one. Transform breathing into prayer. Everyday activity into the catalyst for coming closer to God. Let me invite just a couple minutes of one-to-one here. I invite you to turn to the person next to you and just see if any of that makes sense to you or not. In the same way, in this transformation. And this time I'm talking about transforming drudgery and toil into meaningful work. Spend a lot of our time working. A lot of the problems are that it often feels meaningless or wonder why we're doing it, gets on our nerves, doesn't seem to be fulfilling. We feel alienated from our products of our labor, as Marx told us. Psychologically, we feel as though the job beats us down. We get into a routine. We figure it's hard to make much sense out of it. Composite story again, mother of 4 children, now in their teenage. She's worked hard to raise these children. She's done a good job at it. She's been psychologically wise. She's put her best efforts into it. And now, in their teenage, she begins to wonder, well, is this worth it all? Every time I say, mothers are really dumb for putting all that work into their families. And she hears a feminist movement that says, you're supposed to have a career outside the home. And she gets all these messages from the culture. And she begins to think, well, what am I about? Did this make any sense? Why did I quit school to get married so early and to have these children? And so she's going along with those sort of negative thoughts. But then she does some praying and some meditation, and she sort of thinks about all of it, and she puts this all before God in a way, and she gets sort of a moment of revelation. And the moment of revelation says something like this: look at the faces of your 4 children. Well, look at the faces of your 4 children, and on those faces you will see the meaning of your life and of all your work. Well, that begins to give her perspective on it all. She's able to deal with some of the doubts. And she's able to sort of throw herself back into the business of continuing this raising of these children now in their teenage years. Finds a new strength for it. Begins to make sense. Of course it makes sense. The voices of the culture get muted, or they're put into perspective. I mean, she still has to listen to talk shows that tell her that she ought to have a job outside the home. But it doesn't affect her much, She's able to tune it out. She puts it in perspective, and because she looks at the faces of her 4 children. And she sees in them her sweat and blood. She sees in it all the toil, all the lunches made, and all the clothes washed, and all of the time she served as a taxi service for them, all the running around, all the staying up at night and cleaning up after them. She sees that embodied in them. And when she sees that, she finds in her heart a sense of sort of satisfaction and fulfillment that is quite powerful. And that's what seems to be able to withstand any other cultural messages that are floating in or bombarding her. Well, out of this, the general principle I want to evolve is that our work is precisely our means of sanctification. Our work is precisely our ways of building up the kingdom. Theologically, I think the woman, has a tremendous image and insight there. Very wise, because I think that theologically what I would say is that we believe that all of the effort we put forward in life, all of the purposeful effort, that's what our work is, purposeful effort, program, plan, designed to produce something. It's our productive efforts. So I would distinguish it from leisure that I want to talk about later on. So work is purposeful, planned, It's supposed to produce something. All of those efforts, I believe, are collected. Now, she sees them collected in the faces of her youngsters. And I think for all of us, we'd be able to say we see it collected somehow in the heart of God, in the heart of the universe that God controls and watches over. None of that effort is ever wasted or down the drain. All of it, even if it didn't work outright. Now, even if one works hard on a project and tries to do one's best and it fails, I think in the Christian perspective, the biblical outlook is that that's still all worthwhile. It's all good. It's collected somehow. It's collected maybe in our own hearts, our own psyches. We carry that effort with us. We're the people who had enough sense of responsibility, enough care, enough love to do that work. And that shapes our character and molds our personality. We're better people because we did all of that. So my first theological principle would be to find a way to save all of the human effort made in work. Flash on Teilhard de Chardin's famous Mass upon the world when he was out in the desert and didn't have any bread and wine. And so what he did is he made the whole altar, and he made the bed, into all the human work that was done all this globe of ours at that moment. All the work, every person, all the globe. He made the host. Didn't have any bread. He made that the bread that he would offer to God. None of the human effort's ever wasted, whatever it is. That would be the first. The second point is that work is our way of actualizing ourselves. Work is a great gift from God. It's the way that we are drawn out of selfishness, that we're pulled away from irresponsibility, that we have the opportunity to use our talents and gifts. It's the way we can expend the energy and the breath and the power that God has put into us. It's the way that we become better persons. You know, the way we express our unique individuality. Now, granted, I mean, you can't get too dreamy-eyed about work. I mean, somebody was sitting there and say, yeah, come to my job, you'll get individuality. I'd tell you about it. And I think, we have to factor that in. There's no doubt about it. There seems to be ways in which people can find, however, to express their individuality at work or their love or their creativity. Often, if nothing else, than dealing well with the fellow workers. Often that becomes the challenge. Get along with people who are abrasive. To help people who are obviously down and out and having difficulty. So there's ways in which I think that it does call forth creativity no matter what our job is. We have the chance to make the situation a little bit better, and that enables us to use our talents and gifts. So the second point is work is our way of actualizing ourselves, of improving our very being, becoming a better person, developing virtue, becoming more responsible, using this uniqueness for the benefit of others. The third point is that work is our way of spreading the kingdom, helping the common good, doing something worthwhile to make this world a better place. That's another thing that the mother could think of and sort of extend her analysis, because when she looks at the face of those children also are going to have an effect in the world. The goodness that she's put in there, they have every opportunity to do something with. In all likelihood, the virtue she's given them will spread out. It'll influence others. If she taught them to be sensitive and kind, they walk around that way generally, they create a ripple effect of good in the world. The kingdom is being spread. When we say the reign of God is being spread, that's not some sort of abstract notion. That's concrete. It's as simple as saying that when we do a good job, that somehow other people benefit from it. It helps the common good. Again, Teilhard de Chardin, who I think is helpful in this whole theology of work, points out to us that we have a unique role in building the kingdom that no one else can do. to the point that God's continuing creation and redemption of the world lacks something if we don't do our job well. Well, that's an amazing thought, isn't it? This whole building of the kingdom, something will be missing from it if we don't work well, meet our responsibilities, bring care to the work site and so on. We push the evolutionary spiral forward. We spread the common good, extend the kingdom by our particular work activities. We can look at that and take up another theological way of understanding that is, it is a matter of working with God to continue the creation. So the creation is not seen in this theology as something that happened once at the beginning and that's the end of it. The creation is an ongoing effort of God to build up the world into a community of love, and that what we're doing is working with God in that. God's ongoing effort is to redeem the world from sinfulness, from alienation, from all of the slaveries that imprison people. Our job and our work is to help that redemptive process. Again, it can be as simple as the person who's having trouble at work is saying a kind word to him, or some new person comes and tell him, taking a few minutes to show him how to do something. All of that is part of the redeeming process that goes on. And finally, in that set that I'm putting before you here, the way we're working with God, not only to create and redeem, but to perfect. What God wants to do is not destroy this natural world of ours, but to bring it to perfection. Make sure its innate potential is reached. And so in the Christian perspective, we're trying to help God do that. Make this world a more perfect place. So we think of a teacher going in the classroom and trying to create an environment where students can learn, and giving them a sense of creativity and a sense of their own dignity and worth, and helping them to take hold and to get a good start. That is to help to bring to God's creation to perfection in the personal realm. So, that would be the sort of theology that would help me to transform drudgery and toil and all of the activities that sort of get on our nerves and we're alienated from into meaningful work. Again, practically, how are we going to go about this and so on? Well, as I was lecturing not long ago, and I was giving a long theological explanation of this and how we're supposed to go about it, and one guy raised his hand and says, "Father, you mean we're supposed to say a morning offering?" I said, "Right. They taught me that in grade school. Say a morning offering in the morning. And what you do is you offer all of your good works to God throughout the day, all of your activity and labor. Sanctify it in that way, make it special, attune ourselves." And I think that could be very practical, too. I mean, you can think of somebody driving to work and offering that to God, and therefore being a little sharper on the job, or a little bit easier to get along with fellow workers because that prayer was said. Secondly, I borrow this from Pope John Paul II, who taught us that solidarity is a virtue. That's a big word with the Pope, and it's not just a matter of how we join together, but he thought of it as a virtue. Solidarity meant that we would be the people who would be able to be cooperative, to work with others, to be the people who would know how to get along in a mutual fashion, to receive and to give to others. And the Pope thinks that that's vital to this whole notion of improving work. Of course, you can see that at a large level. I mean, you say, well, it helps if labor and management are in solidarity, are able to cooperate. It helps if people in an office get along, and there's not a lot of heaviness, and they sort of are light, they can kid around and joke. It helps. It helps if people in the factory are able to have some sort of comradeship, often a rough sort of thing, as I recall working in a warehouse, but something that is very attractive, a lot of heavy language and all of that, and crude jokes and so on. But underneath it all always struck me as a sort of sense of solidarity in it. That, this is a rough world here, and we try to, how we cope with it in a way. So you can see that solidarity taking many different forms, and the Pope saw it as a virtue. And I suppose the greatest solidarity would be to feel in union with God in the whole enterprise of for workaholics. See, work can get out of balance in a couple ways, can it? One is it's all nothing, and I don't care about it, and I do sloppy work, and I don't bother about it, and I can't stand it, and it's nothing but drudgery and toil. On the other extreme, we have workaholism. That is, when work is everything. It takes up all one's time and energy. No time left for family, for friends, for anything else. It's all consuming. It becomes an idol. So, especially in dealing with workaholism, it's important to remember that our dignity comes from who we are in God's eyes, more than from what we produce or accomplish. A hard lesson to get straight, because the culture programs us another way. Culture says you're worth what you make. You know, the higher pay scale you get, that's what sort of sets you or gives you your worth in society. I mean, people look at you differently if you make a lot of money. They treat you in a different way. So there's a whole societal thing here that says dignity and worth is related to how much one makes. And it seems important to break through that, especially for the workaholism, to be able to say, no, my dignity comes from who I am and from my fidelity to self, my fidelity to my role and who I am. And a related point, and as I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I can sharply distinguish it or not, but in one time in my mind to distinguish the worth of our accomplishments from the amount of money that we're paid. No, I mean, I think there of the mother in the example. Absolutely crucial for her to feel good about herself, to see the worth of her accomplishments, to distinguish that from how much she's paid, because she's paid nothing for all of that. Same thing, I mentioned teachers before. It seems important for that. I mean, in other words, it's easy to fall into the thing. Society thinks I'm worth only this much, therefore that's all I'm worth. Because they pay me a smaller wage than people who do other things. And you could do that for many different occupations. The teachers come to my mind, where what you try to do is to say, no, what I accomplish, I mean, what I'm doing here has a worth that's independent from how much they pay me. I mean, society's off balance. I mean, we pay baseball players $3 million a year. Even that, you can see how that's competitive. It's not that some of those ball players think it's going to be better if they make 3.1 mil than 2.9 mil. No, it's got all to do with status, doesn't it? The other player is getting 3 mil. I had a better year than he had. I'm a better player than he had. I have to make 3.1. It doesn't matter, I mean, the amount. They know the extra money doesn't mean anything. But it's the status that goes with the money. And that's just exactly how it works. You can see it in the contract negotiations. So what I'm saying is that to have a healthy theology of work here, we got to sort of split those things off in some way or another. We got to distinguish what we accomplish and what's good about all of this for the amount of money paid. It's especially important for priests to remember. One another. How about our one-to-one again, just for a couple minutes so you can process some of that. Let's look at the next item here, which I'm calling moving from some sort of aloneness into a life-giving solitude. I suppose the problem that I have in mind is that aloneness is very difficult for many people. Many people feel alone even when they're close to people or around people. Can feel alienated at a party or feel as though even because one's spouse is not communicative that one is alone while being married. Other people feel alone because they live alone. So that there seems to be a lot of aloneness that goes on in the culture, and it causes a lot of people difficulties. A lot of people don't like to be alone, and it bothers them. And so it seems as though the transformation here is to look to enrich that in some ways and move to what I'm solitude, a composite story. Young man who lives alone and doesn't really like to live alone. I mean, he would like to somebody to marry, but he hasn't found the right yet, shy, afraid to ask him out, a lot of difficulty along that line. He's alone, like it, it's voluntary. And what happens to him when he's okay, like he works, and so that's all right, but in the evening it's hard. And so what he does is he keeps very busy and occupied, and he'll, stereo wearing away, and a lot of things around the apartment to do, and he's got other things he's involved in, and he's just on the run a lot, keeps very busy. But the hard times come for him when it's time to go to bed and all the busyness stops. He lies down, and what usually happens to him at that time is he gets attacked by the demons. The demons use that time of vulnerability to attempt to get at him. And he has all kind of anxieties at times and fears, and it's hard for him to get to sleep. And he gets sort of panicked in that situation. And it's hard for him to know what to do. And what happened to him is he found a technique for beginning to deal with that. And what he did was, when it came time when he got into the evening time, instead of doing his frenzied activity, he just turned the TV off and the stereo off, and didn't drink any beer that night or anything, nothing like that. And he just sat there so that the demons could come and attack him a little earlier on. And he welcomed the attack of the demons. In fact, he did it on purpose so that they would come and attack. And he didn't defend himself. He went into what Muhammad Ali made famous as the roper-doper move. He went on the ropes and just allowed the demons to pummel him. And while they were pummeling him, he attempted to name them, try to find out who they were. Who are you? Are you insecurity? Oh, are you sense of unworthiness? Are you angst, anxiety? Who are you? You're trying to get their measure, find out who they were. And what he found is that by doing that, the demons lost their punching power. Same thing that Muhammad Ali found out with George Foreman. Foreman lost his punching power after pummeling him. And Ali was able to knock him out. And so what this young man was something very comparable. He found that the demons punched themselves out, and he could sort of deliver them some sort of a death blow. The death blow meant something like this, that they had lost their power over him. They could no longer frighten him as much as they once did. The demons brought out of the shadows and out of the darkness into the light were not nearly as formidable as he had thought. And as a result, he was able to move through this, and going to bed at night never again frightened him as much. Wasn't that the demons never attacked him again, but every time they did, he knew they could not destroy him. He knew they could not do him in. They had lost their ultimate kind of power over him. Now, it seems to me that the general principle that I would get out of that has to do with our need to deal with our fears of being alone, and then our call to enter into real solitude. Solitude is a word that describes a more self-confident state in being quiet, where one is not just jumpy and frenzied and thinks, geez, I can stand this about 30 more seconds, I'll get the TV back on. It's a calm and quiet state in which one fundamentally has an openness to God. That's how I would describe solitude as opposed to just being alone. And that's the transformation that the young man underwent, and seems to me is a call that we all have. We're all going to be alone sometimes, even when we're with other people. because they don't understand, or they don't want to talk, or they can't help us, or whatever it is. We're all going to be alone with God. Can we transform it into a creative and positive and life-giving experience that we would call solitude? And then Henry Nouwen writes a lot about that. People read his stuff, find that to be very familiar, I imagine. Now, again, to get at this sort of biblically and from a theological perspective, we remember what Jesus told us, that we should go to our own private room, shut the door, and there pray to our Father who is in that secret place. One might see that as a metaphor for reminding us that if we can go within, if we can sort of feel our way through all of this, that indeed we will find God there. Just like Teresa of Avila said, it's like the soul is a castle, and it's got these rooms. You keep moving into the more interior rooms, and you get into the central room, the most interior room of all. That's where you find the blinding light, the mystery, the one we call God. So that the theological principle would be that if we can get quiet enough and screen things out enough and get enough solitude, that's precisely our meeting point with God. Again, what is behind that is the sense that our God is always with us, never abandons us, remains close even in the midst of the frenzy and the anxiety and the panic that might come with being alone. And remember, today's gospel is marvelous on this, of course. It's the temptations of the Lord. The Lord purposely, driven by the Spirit, goes into the desert. And what happens? Characteristics of man. Bring us closer to God. You do that by trying to remember your dreams, get the patterns, and see what they might reveal about us and our own struggles in life. Even taking the garbage out is supposed to help here. It's supposed to lead us to what I'm calling an eco-spirituality. That is, we got to deal with pollution. And what it ought to do is to help us gain a greater sense of care for the world. I have a priest friend. He was like the rest of us, I suppose, unenlightened in an ecological way. So what he did is he went to an American Indian, one of these vision quests, to a tribe. They get involved in a vision quest. So he got involved in the American Indians and saw something about their whole different feel for the earth, different feel for the environment. And the earth is filled with God's Spirit. You're supposed to treasure it and watch over it. You're not supposed to pollute it. That's wrong. That's to hurt God's creation. And so he began to get a different feel. And this priest really sort of transformed his whole way of acting. He became a vegetarian. He's of the mind that if we all Christians became a vegetarian, we could save the rainforest, save the Brazilian rainforest, because then they wouldn't grow cattle. They would cut them down to grow cattle to produce beef for our fast food restaurants. So he thinks we ought to all become vegetarians like he is. And he's got a great, he won't use extra energy. He's just really careful about all that. So what he's taken is sort of a sense of the pollution that we have to deal with, and he's changed it around, given it a new twist. There's a book out called 50 Simple Things You Can Do to Save the Earth that tells us some of these. Says simple things like don't take a bag for a small purchase when you go out of a store. And they give us statistics about how much we would save if that was done. Well, you got all kind of simple 50 little things that one might do to develop what we call an eco-spirituality. I am going to stop. Oh, let's see here. I feel like I talked forever at Mass, and now I've talked forever tonight. I must be on a roll. What about questions? We're going to quit at 9:30. Got 6 minutes. Anybody got any comments, questions, fill-ins, whatever? Well, maybe maybe I will do my 30-second summation here. Invitation is to look over the structured approach to Lent, which is a dialectical approach to this. And what one might do is check out Tony DeMello's parable on the dialectic. Tony DeMello says, is there such a thing as 1 minute wisdom? There certainly is, says the Master, but surely 1 minute is too brief. It is 59 seconds too long. To his puzzled disciples, the Master later explained all this. How much time does it take to catch sight of the moon? Then why all these years of spiritual endeavor? Opening one's eyes may take a lifetime. Seeing is done in a flash. One of those wisdom sayings, I think, that makes the point that I want to make tonight. The structured approach is essential. It takes a lifetime. It takes systematic, careful effort and prayer and spiritual reading and meditation, all those things. But its purpose is to be able, in a flash, to see the moon, to be able to see the stars, to be able to pick up the beauty of God's creation. The two have to work together. We get the structured side going properly, then we will attune ourselves to these various ways so that we can indeed find the Lord in simple things like eating and working and our recreation. I want to thank everybody for coming. I will be doing my lectures again in the spring quarter. I'm doing a 4-part series on Tuesday evenings on something like American spirituality, and I'm going to do those starting on May 1st. I'm doing it because the law school is out of session, and I'm hoping the parking will be better. But on the Tuesday evenings of May, I will be lecturing on spirituality again. So if some of you might want to put that down in your calendar, you can do that. And if anybody here wants to receive my reflections articles regularly, and you're not on the mailing list, you could give me your name. I'd be glad to do that. During Lent, Sister Carol Ann Smith, who's in the back there, and I are doing a series of radio programs on Sunday nights. We're discussing the readings for the Sunday liturgy. So that's 10:30 WSPD. That's mentioned in your handout. So people who want to do something on Sunday evenings and get a little another slant on all of that, you're welcome to listen to Sister Carol Ann and myself on WSPD. Finally, Rick Wohl there is, if anybody wants a copy of my Gracious Mystery book, he's got them in the back. I want to thank everybody for being here.